introduction, my name is Emaali, and I work for a platform named Experienz, which is a part of Mitra Innovations. It is great to be speaking to all of you this morning. We are going to speak about something that is very, very important to all of us. It needs our undivided attention and, of course, immediate action. And how we behave in the next 8 to 10 years, which is very crucial, is going to define the quality of life for the next couple of generations to come. So before I go into telling you all about what ESG is, ESG stands for Environment, Social, and Governance, and what it consists of. I'll be speaking about the importance of ESG for companies, why ESG is so complex to measure, report, and track, and of course, how technology can help companies make a difference in this space. But before we get into all of that, I do want to emphasize on the importance and why we're speaking about this so much. There is no doubt in everyone's mind that climate change is actually happening. You would have seen the record high temperatures that were recorded in UK this year, the flooding that happened across Europe, the wildfires that spread across the breadths and the widths of California. In 2019, the fires that happened in Australia that wiped out so many millions of animals and disrupted the biodiversity to a great extent, to the floods that actually submerged 1/3 of Pakistan underwater a couple of months ago. So there is no doubt that climate change is happening, and it is happening very, very fast and very rapidly. So what's really causing all of this? This is caused due to the ever-rising temperatures of the planet, which is called global warming. This is happening due to the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we're releasing to the atmosphere due to all our activities and predominantly because of the burning of fossil fuels. So what greenhouse gas emissions really does is these gases are able to trap heat within our atmosphere, which results in the temperatures of the planet increasing. And this results in catastrophic effects like what we are experiencing right now. And in 2015, all world leaders came together at the Paris Climate Summit, and they agreed that we need to cap global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this is what we call the 1.5 degree pathway. Why 1.5 degrees Celsius? Because anything above that is going to have severe effects on us. The planet obviously is going to survive. It has survived for millions of years, but it is not the case when it comes to life on Earth. So we have a part to play. How do we cap global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius? We have to negate all the emissions that we are responsible for at the moment. So which means we have to cut everything out by 2050. That is the target, scientific target that has been set. But we don't have time till 2050. We have to minimize our emissions by 50% by 2030. And this is why I said the next 8 to 10 years is going to be critical for all of us. And this is what we mean by net zero. And you would have heard terms such as decarbonization. What we mean by decarbonization is actually removing the carbon from the atmosphere. But where are we heading right now, even though these targets were set 7 years ago? So this is something that was published by McKinsey. What you see is the 1.5 degree pathway in the blue line. But if we look at the historical trends, at the beginning of year 2100, we are going to hit a temperature increase to 5 degrees Celsius. And even if we go at the current trends, we are still going to increase global warming by 3.5 degrees Celsius. And mind you, if this does happen, life on Earth is going to be severely affected. So this is why the United Nations, all global leaders are calling upon every single one of us to take action right now, because we are heading towards disaster. It is not only in terms of the environmental aspect. If we look at the social elements, so I've taken one simple example here. We've been speaking about increasing the female representation in the workforce. But if we compare the numbers from 2017 to 2022, at an entry level, the female representation has only increased by 1 percentage point. If we look at the C-suite or the senior level of an organization, it has only increased by 6 to 7 percentage points. This is why we are severely calling for action, and it's time to do away from commitments and promises and really take action. But even though organizations are very slow in terms of taking action, the investment world is taking a different turn in terms of this. If you look at the numbers simply in 2020, the total amount that was invested in assets was $53 trillion, and $17 trillion actually went into ESG assets. What this means is every $1 of $3 spent has gone into ESG investments. So investors are investing more and more into organizations that actually have a ESG mandate, and companies that are adopting this will have a better opportunity of attracting investments into the organization. I do want to emphasize more on this, where the United Nations Secretary General at COP27 that just concluded in Egypt this year. He is highlighting that we are on our way to climate health. He is emphasizing on the climate emergency and the code red on humanity. So they are calling upon action, and the United Nations have actually set global goals that can help organizations achieve these targets. What you see here is actually the 10 principles that the United Nations came up with. So the United Nations in 2015 highlighted that we are facing 4 key challenges. One being the planet and the climate, second, poverty and inequality, freedom and justice, and finally, gender equality. So in terms of addressing these 4 challenges, the United Nations Global Compact came up with the 10 principles that will address human rights, labor laws, environment, and of course, anti-corruption. And to achieve these 10 principles, they also went ahead and defined 17 sustainable development goals. So they called upon not just countries and governments, not just the public sector, but reiterated that the public sector has a huge role to play in actually achieving these goals and targets. And with this emerged the concept of ESG. So if you look at the 10 principles and the sustainability development goals, they all address environmental issues, social issues, and governance issues. But of course, you may have heard of the terms sustainability, environment, health and safety, and of course, corporate social responsibility. But there is a key differentiator between all of these that I mentioned before to ESG. ESG actually becomes the heart of the organization. It becomes the foundation on the strategies, the business processes, business decisions are all built on. It goes away from companies just focusing on making profit and putting shareholder value, but they focus on the impact that they have on the environment and society, while of course they focus on profits and shareholder value. So this is the key differentiator between everything we have heard in the past to ESG. But what is covered under ESG? And what you see here is separate pillars for environment, social, and governance. I emphasized a lot on the greenhouse gas emissions earlier. The reason I went into so much detail was to emphasize on the importance of it. If we look at companies, there are 4 different categories that directly contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, and then 15 categories that come from your supply chain and other indirect methods that contribute to the carbon footprint of the company. So your greenhouse gas emissions of your company will result in the carbon footprint of the organization. Then you have elements such as your energy management, how much of energy is used within the organization, how much of it is purchased from the grid, how much of it is renewable, the water management within the organization, how much of waste is generated within the company, and of course, things like ethical sourcing, how much of your products, your services, and your raw material come from sustainable material, and of course, looking at biodiversity and natural capital, depending on the industry that you're in. But what you see here is all the environmental elements are very quantitative and can be measured quite easily if you have the data required. But when it comes to the social element, it is not as straightforward as the environmental pillar. The social pillar is divided into 2, which is your human capital and your social capital. Human capital is predominantly about the impact the organization has on your direct stakeholders, mainly your employees, but of course your shareholders, customers, and suppliers. So under the human capital, we look at things like diversity and inclusion, of course, employee experience and engagement, which is becoming very, very critical for organizations to report on. Attrition, pay parity. What we mean by pay parity is the pay that a male and a female gets for the same job role that they do. You'd be surprised to know that this number is still stuck at 16%. The world average is still stuck at 16%. But when it comes to the social capital, it's about the impact that you have on the community that the organization operates in. So if you have certain initiatives that you carry out to uplift the lives of the community that you operate in, how do you really quantify it? How do you really measure that? So these are the things that are covered under the social pillar. But as explained earlier, this is a lot more qualitative because it involves people, their behavior, how they think, and quantifying it is a lot more difficult than the environmental pillar. Governance, although the last letter of ESG, really binds the environment and the social pillars together. It's about how the organization is structured that will enable your ESG strategy to be implemented within the organization. The senior leadership will be held accountable and responsible for the ESG mandate of the company. You will measure metrics such as bribery and corruption, diversity at a board level, what the executive remuneration looks like. But last but not least, it's all about how transparent and auditable the company is in terms of their ESG strategy. So in a nutshell, this is what ESG is all about. But a lot of companies, a lot of people think ESG is an additional cost to the organization, which is not the case. And that is the beauty of ESG. There are so many examples around us that actually tell us ESG has actually helped organization in terms of improving their financial performance. For example, it has the ability of cutting down costs and increasing profits. The perfect example that comes to mind right now is the example of FedEx. FedEx is in the process of converting their entire fleet of vehicles, of 35,000 vehicles, to electric vehicles. And they've currently converted just 20% of it, and they're measuring their performance as they go. And what they have seen is that they save 50 million gallons of fuel every single year, which directly contributes to the bottom line of the company. The valuation of the company, as I mentioned earlier, more and more investors are investing in companies that have an ESG mandate in place. So it helps increase the valuation of the company. It helps attract talent and, of course, retain it. Gen Zs are just entering the job market. They are more focused on how employees are being treated within the company, how conscious the company is about the environment. So attracting and retaining talent will play a key role as well. Future-proofing your business. Again, while you reap the benefits of adopting ESG, failing to do so will have consequences as well. The Pacific Gas and Electric Company in California, one of the largest utility companies in California, had to file for bankruptcy overnight, simply because they were held accountable for starting some of the wildfires that happened in California. And they incurred a cost of $20 billion just to ground the wires that they use within the company. So that's the kind of effect it can have on companies if you actually look the other way in terms of your responsibility towards the environment and society. The most recent example being Tesla. Tesla, we all know, is focused on the renewable energy, the efficient power sources, the electric vehicles that they use, but they were taken out of the S&P 500 simply because the same amount of importance was not given to the social element. The employees, the diversity and inclusion was not looked at. The employee experience was quite negative within the company, so they were taken off the S&P 500. So these are the consequences that companies can have of not adopting ESG. But I'm sure we all understand that ESG is important. All companies, no one can be a bystander anymore. It is time to take action. But why is it so complex for organizations to actually come on board? We've spent a lot of time in this space researching to really understand what companies need, where they need help in terms of technology. And speaking to over 100 organizations, we found 4 key challenges that every single organization faces when it comes to adopting ESG. First, I spoke about a lot of global goals, reporting frameworks, and all of that. There is no one accepted standard global framework that companies can follow. The second being, it requires a large amount of data to be brought together that is spread across multiple locations, departments, in different systems, maybe on Excel sheets. How do you really bring all of this data together to create one holistic view? Thirdly, all these measurements, all this data that is collected needs to be calculated in a scientific manner. All ESG measures need to be scientific, outcomes need to be scientific, and it needs to happen in a standardized manner every single time data is interpreted. Last but not least, as I mentioned about the Tesla example, even companies that score very, very high on the environmental pillar tend to score very low on the social pillar, obviously because it's very hard to measure, it's very hard to quantify. So companies tend to score low and tend to prioritize the environmental pillar over the social pillar. But when it comes to ESG, there has to be a balance between the E, S, and the G. So these are the global challenges that companies face, but how can technology really help overcome this? As I mentioned earlier, it is time for us to take action. We cannot waste time on collection of data, of calculations, of interpreting data. So this is where technology can take away that pain point from you so that organizations can focus on action. What experienz really does is it's a platform that helps you record, report, and focus more on action. We help digitize your entire ESG journey. The platform will do all calculations and interpretations for you so that you end up with actionable insights so that you can focus on action. This is what the high-level framework of experienz looks like. The platform is built on global goals, such as the United Nations 10 principles, the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, the Paris Agreement on the 1.5-degree pathway. It also enables reporting against standard reporting frameworks, such as GRI, SASB, TCFD, CSRD, which is currently being used in the European region, and of course, abiding by all regulations in different geographic regions. We cover all modules across the E and the E, S, and the G, as I mentioned earlier when we covered the pillars that come under E, S, and G. And of course, experienz has a couple of accelerators to help you drive action. We can predict or forecast what your future trends would look like based on historical data. We enable you to do scenario planning within the platform to actually highlight or agree on the action that you need to take. And of course, all reports required for reporting can be generated with a click of a button. The power of the platform really comes through the integrations. So experienz will just be a plugin to all your existing systems. It will just sit on top of all existing systems. It will just have connectors to pull data from your existing systems. We have integrations to systems such as the EPC ratings in the UK. We also pull in recommendations from databases. We have global data on greenhouse gas emissions. And then, of course, SDG goals and world data. We pull all of this in so that we can give you a benchmark or a peer comparison as to where your organization is against your competition. With that, I just want to leave you with what the platform really looks like. We understand that ESG is something that needs to be targeted at different stakeholders. So what you see here is a summary overview, predominantly targeting the C-suite or the senior leadership of an organization. So what you see here is the reduction of your carbon footprint. So if I'm a chief sustainability officer, I look at this screen and I think, okay, my carbon footprint is 3 million metric tons for the year. And 2 million of it is actually coming from my supply chain, which is my indirect emissions. And of course, my base year was set at 2017, and I can see what my carbon footprint looks like over the years. And of course, the energy management is of great importance to me. And 50 of my facilities fall under an EPC rating C or less. And my energy intensity on an average is about 208 kilowatt hours per square meter. And then, of course, I can see the locations in terms of my EPC ratings because of the classifications given by that particular region. But of course, we need more insights when it comes to a department who's managing this into great detail. You obviously need more detailed views. What you see here is your scope 1 and scope 2 or your direct emissions against the science-based target initiative. So this particular company has set their target against the 1.5 degree pathway to completely go net zero by the year 2030. And what you see with the blue line is the performance against the targets, interim targets that you have set year on year. And of course, we do tie back all our KPIs back to at least one or many of the sustainable development goals set by the United Nations. We also have views on what the supply chain's contribution would look like. So when it comes to your indirect emissions or your scope 3 emissions, we report against all 15 categories of the emissions. And you can also have views of how you can cluster your suppliers, how many of your suppliers are at very low emissions or how many of your suppliers are at very high emissions. And again, we pull publicly available data from any data that is available. If it's not available, we have the ability of capturing information from the supply chain and doing the respective scope 3 carbon calculation for the organization. And you can also see what your supply chain's performance would look like. So what you see in the black horizontal line is the target that your suppliers may have set for themselves, and of course, their performance against this. Of course, your supply chain has a direct impact on the carbon footprint of the company. So in terms of streamlining your supply chain, these are the types of views you can actually get from experience. That is mostly on the environmental aspect, but if we move into the social element, as I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to quantify your employee experience. So we have an IP with us where we use a questionnaire developed by subject matter experts that help quantify the employee experience within the organization. And we also understand an overall number does not give enough insights for an organization to take action. So we use a model called a 8-pillar model, where we categorize these answers under 8 different areas such as rewards and benefits, physical and emotional well-being. So companies can take targeted initiatives on where it is required. Last but not least, we have views on diversity and inclusion. Obviously, this is something that more and more companies are reporting against. So you can have views such as your gender diversity, your age diversity, whether it's your tenure diversity. So all of this data can be captured within the platform and of course measured. And we also appreciate that each ESG journey for every company is different, and the platform can be configured to suit your journey and doesn't necessarily have to be what we offer to you. That is all about the platform and all about ESG. Of course, it's such a vast space. I was just scratching at the surface of all of it given the time that we have today. But the most important thing I want to leave with you is that start where you are. It is time to take action. You don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money, but start where you are and of course go on that journey. And we are here to support you in any way we can. Please do visit us at www.experienz.co.uk. Reach out to us and we will be happy to help you on your journey. That is it from me. Thank you very much.